Hi, I'm Omid Jalili, actor and comedian, and a Baha'i. Now, I'm a British Iranian, which means I'm a minority. And even within the Iranian community, the Baha'is are a minority, so I'm a minority within a minority. And even within the Baha'i community, the UK, people thought my family a bit strange, so I'm a minority within a minority within a minority.
But as to what the actual Baha'i faith is, today the spiritual headquarters of the Baha'i faith are in Haifa, Israel. But it was founded in the 1850s by a Persian nobleman, later to be known as Baha'u'llah. 50 years later, his successor Abdu'l-Baha set out on a mission to spread the Baha'i teachings of humanity and equality around the world.
In this film, I'll be following in the footsteps of an incredible trip he made to London in 1911, where thousands of people came out to see him and hear him speak.
The visit was made possible by Lady Sarah Blomfield, a wealthy philanthropist and mover and shaker in British society, who lived here at 97 Cadogan Gardens. When Abdu'l-Baha stayed, he probably didn't have to contend with the building work. But to tell me more about his trip, I'm joined by fellow Baha'i Leslie.
So Leslie, tell us something about why Abdu'l-Baha came to London and how he ended up staying with the most unlikely of people, Lady Blomfield.
He said himself, actually, that he came to this part of the world because he was attracted by the unity of the Friends. And anything that was connected with unity and love attracted Abdu'l-Baha.
And tell us something about who Lady Blomfield was and her status in society in London at the time.
Lady Blomfield had a wonderful love and a respect for people from all backgrounds. She was a founder member of the Save the Children Fund, and she worked with the poor. She gave of her own substance to try and improve the situation of people in London, and had close friendships with the suffragettes.
If she introduced Abdu'l-Baha to a lot of the people in the suffrage movement, how did they respond to Abdu'l-Baha?
Emily Pankhurst herself came to Lady Blomfield's home and met with Abdu'l-Baha there. And he said she should work with dignity and love. He mentioned poise and serenity, and that she should call on spiritual forces, spiritual faith, and spiritual power.
There you go. Poise and serenity, two things I think everyone associates with me. Let's move on to the next place. Taxi! It seems so incongruous to me that someone from the East comes to the centre of Chelsea, Cadogan Gardens, to spend time with Lady Blomfield, who has all these contacts with all the activists of the day. And not only does he hold his own with someone like Emmeline Pankhurst, who is the founder of the suffragette movement, but she listened to him. And I love the fact that the early believers in the West were mostly women, and there were social activists. I don't know, that inspires me. On September 10th, 1911, Abdu'l-Baha gave his very, very first speech in the West, here at City Temple in Holborn, in front of 2,000 people. He was elderly, he was frail, didn't speak much English, and unaccustomed to Western ways. And yet the content of that speech was about the oneness of humanity. Not just that, he proclaimed that the greatest gift of God today in the Enlightened Age is the knowledge of the oneness of humanity.
The more I learn about the visit, the more it's clear what a huge impact he had on the social reformers of the day here in London. Next stop on my tour is St. John the Divine Church in the heart of Westminster. Abdu'l-Baha had been invited to speak by Archdeacon Wilberforce, chaplain to the House of Commons, so a real big shot back then.
So this is where he gave his second talk.
And Leslie is rejoining me.
Wow, here we are. This is amazing.
Yes. So hundreds of people were assembled in the church and expecting the presence of Abdu'l-Baha. And he came in with the Archdeacon, and they walked hand in hand down the aisle of the church.
Hand
together,
in hand down this aisle.
hand.
Wow.
And came and stood at the front of the church. And people were very aware. It was a beautiful moment, East and West coming together.
Extremely powerful symbol.
Yes.
And then what happened when they left?
When Abdu'l-Baha went outside, he saw some of the Salvation Army singers who were singing in the street. He asked who they were and showed an interest in their work and the fact that they worked with the poor. And he pointed out how he himself had been poor throughout his life. And he said, "You are poor, you are the brothers of Jesus Christ." Jesus Christ was poor.
Wow. It's a big principle of the Baha'i faith that to abolish the extremes
of wealth
poverty
and
and wealth.
Yeah, absolutely.
that last thing Leslie said made me really think about the extremes of poverty and wealth that we have. I love that there's a symbiosis in that for me being a Baha'i, that it's the two things hand in hand, being a spiritual being, but also a social activist. And I love that.
This is the final stop on my tour. At the end of his visit, Abdu'l-Baha gave his farewell address in Bloomsbury. And sitting here today has moved me to reflect on the wonderful message from his journey to London.
How relevant is it to follow in his footsteps today? Absolutely, because everything he was talking about 110 years ago is pertinent as we see today. The equality of men and women, we see that in the Me Too movement. The oneness of humanity, we see that in racial inequality. And abolishing extremes of wealth and poverty couldn't be more relevant today, because these are the things that undermine human society, that cause conflict and wars. So it's been completely relevant.
Omid, thank you so much for joining us. You're one of these people that when you turn up, you just make the whole room feel better and brighter. So, and it's true, and it's a very great privilege for us that you've shared your faith with us. So today's actually the centenary.
Yes.
Of.
Well, his name is Abdu'l-Baha. It's very difficult to say the name. Don't worry, I bailed you out there. It's fine.
We learned a lot from your piece, but we didn't actually learn about the
pronounce the
person.
name.
I didn't sleep much. Yeah, so it's the centenary of his passing, but it's actually a very happy day for you. How are you going to
Baha'is
celebrate?
all around the world are celebrating it, and it's interesting. I feel so moved and honoured to make this film, because there are millions of Baha'is who would love to do this. They'll probably do it way better than me, but it is a celebration, and I learned a hell of a lot doing it as well, because some of the early Westerners who went to see Abdu'l-Baha around the 1890s, they went and learned about the equality of men and women, and actually came back and triggered off the suffragette movement. So when Emmeline Pankhurst spent time with him, she knew exactly who he was. So he was very much an inspiration for
Yeah,
them.
it really feels like it was ahead of its time then.
Yes.
Look, you were raised in a Baha'i family. It was great reading about your upbringing. I mean, your dad sounds like he was a really, really funny man.
You've read my book.
Yeah, we do our research. But you actually have links right back to the very beginnings of Baha'i, don't you?
Yes. I'm actually fifth generation Baha'i, and my father's great-grandfather, so my great-great-grandfather, is part of a kind of like poet laureates. But what they used to do is there were poets and storytellers who would pitch up in a town, and they would do their stories, and then they get money, a bit like the Free Fringe in Edinburgh.
Yes.
And people would give them pennies. And of course, Abdu'l-Baha he didn't meet them, but he guided them. He'd like say, when you finished, maybe you can talk about some spiritual principles, talk about service to humanity. And usually they would be well received, or sometimes they'd be persecuted, and then they'd be like pelted with stones, or sometimes even paraded around the town with chains around their necks and dunces hats and walking around barefoot in snow. So actually,
Which is also like the Free Fringe.
and it's a bit like my tour right now. Yeah.
No, but this is what inspired you to take up your faith again, wasn't it? Like reading about the persecutions, is that right?
Yeah, there was persecutions, and also I used to dream about these poets. Actually,
Right.
they'd say, you're kind of doing what we did. You're touring around, but your material, you need some work, because you're just doing Godzilla impressions. And I'd be happy. I say Godzilla's my thing. That's what I do, and dancing. And they say I can't really help him. So yeah, but they were always inspiring me, it's a great background to have, because I'm doing what they did.
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it, how comedy and religion mix. I mean, comedy, certainly when we started, was an incredibly atheist, very atheist environment.
Yes.
And there was a lot of sort of the new atheists were comedians. And most Christians on the circuit keep it, well hidden. But you play religious characters, you talk about religion a lot in your stand-up. Do you think they go well together?
Well, I mean, if you think about shows like Vicar of Dibley and Father Ted and Rev and all these things, they're out there. So we do it. And I was raised on Dave Allen, who was an Irish Catholic, who actually his family were Baha'is. It was quite interesting.
Really?
His family became Baha'is. And so the whole idea of laughing and joking, absurdity is very important to me as well, because it's almost like we weren't asked to be born. We're never asked when we want to die. So life is absurd. And I know Abdu'l-Baha, when he was a prisoner, they just used to deal with things by laughing, literally laughing until they were crying. So they're dealing with the absurdity of their situation. So I think the whole thing of never making fun of people, things they hold sacred, I think is very important. But that whole thing of religion and comedy is something I'm still trying to learn.
Yeah.
And you're the very first Baha'i person to have their own show. I mean,
Yeah, I
ever
know.
in the world. It's amazing. Did you feel like the weight of the world or the weight of the Baha'i world on your shoulders?
I think all Baha'is, whatever I'm doing it, I'm making mistakes in public, so that's probably why it's a relevant question on this show. But I think all Baha'is feel a responsibility in their work, whatever they do, that they want to be representatives. You know, we're trying to be people who are good, who are in society, and we have this twofold moral purpose where you're developing yourself and also changing society. So I'm not more important just because I'm a first comedian doing it, but there was a lot of responsibility.
So you're on tour at the moment, the Good Times tour.
Yes.
You're going to be touring for a year and a half. That's an awful lot of good times.
Yes.
What's that about?
What's it about?
Yeah.
It's about 140 dates, but it's about us coming out of pandemic, and it's about the new normal, and it's about how do we navigate this new world, and also for comedians, and for people in general, how do we deal with comedy? It's a big question. It's also I'm trying to make it as funny as possible because we've watched stuff digitally, but I'm so thankful to everyone who's come out, because when they come out and they have the live experience, it physiologically has an effect on you. So I think I'm really happy that people have come. Go to my website, omidjalil.net. Thousands of tickets left.
It's brilliant to talk to you.
Great talking
Thank
to
you
you.
so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you.